I'm your host, Damian Pardo, and welcome to the 4WardMiami show. 4WardMiami is a local nonprofit, and we work on diversity and inclusion. I am so happy here today to have my good friend, Jacqui Colyier, who's the High Empress of the Galaxy, also a preservationist and a historian. And today we're going to talk about race. We're going to talk about colorism. We're going to talk about the things that divide us in Miami-Dade County and how to talk about it. Like, how do we even talk about it? We're good friends.
For a long time.
Long time.
Yeah.
And we don't know how to talk about it.
I know. That's what always amazes me. We're going to talk about this today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're going to talk about it because it's important to talk about.
100%.
One of the things that's interesting is that I just had a similar conversation with a Caribbean, Jamaican American friend of mine, who didn't quite understand what I meant when I said colorism, and that there is such a thing as colorism, because she said, oh, there's no such thing. And I said, I think so. And so she thought about it for a while, and we both talked about it for a bit, and then we really began to see it, and she began to see it, and we began to talk about it more. But, you know, there's a lot that goes on with colorism, a lot that goes on with how we treat people and how people are treated when they come to this country. And Damien, you and I have had this conversation, although we haven't dealt with it, in any depth or anything. The whole idea that white Cubans were treated so much differently than Black Cubans when they came to this country. And in fact, if you look at the statistics that talk about how Black Cubans were treated when they came to Miami, it's just absolutely astounding. And that many Black Cubans are, in a bit of a predicament because they can't understand what happened. But I think that they do understand, because I'm sure that colorism wasn't invented, when they came to America. I think that when I talk to my Black Cuban friends, I think that they thought it would be different, because America is supposed to be the great melting pot, where everyone gets along and where everyone is treated equally based upon merit, based upon, your ability to achieve and your ability to do things. So we had that conversation, and, you and I just kind of talk about it, just kind of kick it around, but not really go into it in depth. So tell me.
Well, I mean, I think that there's always a two-way conversation. I'm curious, with your friend from the Caribbean, it seemed like she learned a little bit about colorism. What did you come away with kind of learning from her perspective?
I came away learning and thinking that a lot of what we talk about is really superficial, and that what happens is that it is so ingrained and so entrenched until we really see it but don't see it. The fact that if you're a light complexion, like if you look like Kamala Harris, you're treated differently than if you look like Michelle Obama. The fact that if you look like, I'm trying to think of her name right now. She was President Obama's advisor, one of his top advisors. Oh, I can't think of her name. But at any rate, Valerie Jarrett, that you're treated totally differently than even if you look like Michelle Obama or Kamala Harris. So, the whole idea that women and men of color are treated so differently is just something that we've not looked at, that we've not talked about, that we've just kind of let it run under the radar. Although all of my Cuban friends love to tell me about their abuela who looks like me, and I'm like, okay, so where is abuela? Is she hidden somewhere?
No.
What's going on? Where is abuela?
No, I think part of what makes this so difficult to discuss is that I always love to use the example of the glass is half empty, half full.
Yeah.
There's a glass, it's half empty, half full. Some people are going to see it half full. Some people are going to see it half empty. It's human nature.
Okay.
It's the way we work. right? There are lots of illusions like that where you see the old witch or the young witch. And what happens is whatever you see, whether it's the old witch or the young witch or half full or half empty, all of a sudden you become vested in that point of view. And your ability to take a step back and say, okay, wait a minute, let me think about this. Because part of the issue that I face, the challenge, is that I'm not just thinking about color.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm thinking about so many other aspects that are treated similarly or have the same kind of challenges, or whether it's sexual orientation, or whether it's gender, or whether it's your accent.
Yeah.
Right? If you're Cuban, you have an accent.
I
You
know,
may not get that promotion.
I know.
Right? So when we isolate and we're only talking about color or this, we run a huge risk of just leaving everyone else behind, of not bringing them along in the conversation. I use a great example in LGBTQ world, right, where I've been an activist for a long time and on the Cuba issues as well.
Right.
In LGBTQ world, I believe our success was built around allyship. It was all built around allyship. We couldn't have gotten to where we were without all of our straight friends and people willing to hear our stories, willing to understand what we were really about, that it wasn't about sexuality, that really was about who you fell in love with. And it took years and years and tons of hard work and tons of allyship. And I've always felt like a very strong ally of my Black friends and the Black community. But at the same time, all of a sudden, I feel my voice has been shut down. And in some ways. So I'll use an example. At certain times, it said, well, only Black people can talk about Black experience. I'm like, okay, all right, it's true. I'm not Black. So little by little, I felt like that the importance of bringing people along in the movement has somewhat taken a back seat to like, no, we have a story, it needs to be told and we need to tell it and people need to listen and people need to learn and I think that works with some, but I think with others, it serves the opposite purpose.
I hear what you're saying and I understand what you're saying, but I think that in order to bring people along, you have to give them that space, even if it's for, I don't know how long it takes, but you have to give them that space so they can tell their story, so they can be made to feel that, Black Lives Matter.
100%.
So they can begin to understand that they are important. And once people get to the point where they know that they matter, they know that they are important in the whole equation, then they can begin to say, if I'm important, you're important too. That your opinion and your life matters just as much, But I think that what has happened is that we've never allowed ourselves to have those conversations. I am just so proud and just so happy to see what is going on in the LGBTQ community, because I know that at some point they will be mature enough, or that community will be mature enough to say, hey, it's not just me, because thank God we're finally looking at trans. I mean, the whole idea that for years and years, this community sat and just has, and still is for the most part, has been so demoralized and so marginalized that it has been incredible. And I think that as we finally move forward and every community has the opportunity to become mature and to be able to see and to be able to understand that, hey, it's all of us in this together.
Right. What you're saying is so true and so important. All of us in this together, but yet it seems like there are issues that are important for people in that mix, where that spotlight, which currently is on trans, thank God, right? Because you're absolutely right with everything you've said, but we're also leaving out so many others where the spotlight isn't even on them. They're not even on the radar. Some of the most marginalized people here speak Creole or Spanish or another language, and they have no way of accessing the system. They're not even on the radar.
No.
People aren't even thinking about on the website putting a little translation conversion button, the easiest thing to do with Google Translate. You know how many websites have that? Not a lot. So easy things to make lives better. But instead, usually the way they get received is, this is America, grow up. Same thing with an immigrant, right?
I know.
The other day we're having conversations, two friends, one was talking about experience with Cuba. He's like, oh, dude, get over it. You're in America. Like, you need to get over it. He's like, wait a minute. I had to hear about 450 years ago with you. Look, so,
wait a minute. I just got here 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Or 10 years ago.
Yeah, right. Right.
The thing is, people live a trauma.
Yeah.
And that trauma doesn't go away just because you went somewhere. And people are good at wanting to express their trauma to have people understand it, but they're not as good at listening.
I know.
At listening, and Black Lives Matter. I was the first person to go first protest.
I know, you were there with me.
Exactly. Right. And at the same time, it was very difficult for me when in July, what was happening in Cuba, Black Lives Matter took a position on the issue, which was supportive of the regime in their Instagram feeds.
Okay, wait now.
Yeah.
That was one little component of Black Lives Matter.
But that's the one where all the money, the funding goes to. Those are their main links.
There is no, Black Lives Matter is such a disparate group of, folks who say Black Lives Matter and who have who have input into the whole idea of Black Lives Matter. And, trying to cut through that to say, no, stop. It's not just, we all don't agree about the whole thing, about the values of, believing that the regime, because
that's important.
On my car, I still have my little sticker that says, libertad,
libertad.
Yeah. And so
no, you did the videos with us.
Yeah, right. So there are some.
But this is what I'm trying to get at. I'm sorry to interrupt,
No,
Jacqui,
go ahead.
but
No problem.
what I was trying to get at with that is that because this was challenged online,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So I dealt with a lot of people saying, and I said, look, this is the national account under this name. These are the fundraising links for people to donate. This is the legitimate, the most one, that sent this message out.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that it's not all the same because it's the same for any movement, right? You have all different kinds. But can the Miami chapter, because what I was looking for was the support. I'm like,
Okay.
it's okay. We get that you're not part of that, but then send a message.
Yeah.
Because.
Okay. Point well taken. One. because I think that the way we get through this is we have these conversations and we listen to each other and then we say, you're right. Miami's Black Lives Matter chapter could have stood up and said, okay, we're in Miami. We're at the heart of this. We're really in the belly of all of this.
The beast,
and and we could have stood up and said something and addressed it with the national chapter. And that still can be done. That's not something that happens, that we have to wait on. We can do that, today, tomorrow, but it should be done.
This is beautiful, though, what you're saying right now. This is what I go to a lot of times when I talk about political polarization. Yeah. And you and I have had this conversation where we've said, you know what? Sometimes it feels like we're not meant to be together.
Yeah.
We're not designed.
Yeah. But I think that, and sometimes,
although naturally, I don't see why it wouldn't. Like, to me, it's the most common thing.
I totally agree, right? Because we're both facing the same kinds.
We're all Miamians,
right?
We're reasonable. We want the best for the community. Well, High Empress of the Universe, I think.
Right. High Empress.
Yeah, I think that's how we move forward, and to do stuff like this, and talk like this, because at the end of all of this, it's a lack of trust.
So why don't we figure it out? Why don't we think about how we bring, the Miami chapter together and talk about it right here, in this studio.
Great. I'm up for that.
Because
100%.
to me, a part of what we have to do is, we can't just talk. We have to walk the walk and talk the talk.
That's how you build trust.
Part of that means and that's how you build trust.
That's how you build trust. Work together.
During the 60s, a part of the whole, and not that I know anything about this, I've read these things as a historian. Um, one of the things that really worked so well, with the Black community and the Jewish community was building trust, with each other, marching together. There's nothing like marching together with a bunch of folks all around you,
Yeah.
calling names and throwing stuff at you. And you're still holding hands, you're still locked arm in arm, and you're walking together. Going through something like that is how we do this. I mean, I went to marches and everything, and I was kind of by myself a lot of times, but that didn't bother me, because I can always, I'd go with Lena, and Mo, and then I just hang out with them. But I think that we should have had a larger presence. I also think about the whole thing when the synagogue was, when the guy came into the synagogue and shot all of those people. And I thought to myself, I cannot not go to the synagogue. I went to the one in Coral Gables. I can't think of the name, whatever. But I went to the one in Coral Gables off of US 1, which is now Tubman Highway.
Mm-hmm.
But I went to I went to that synagogue, and there were 5 of us that went together because I was determined that the Jewish community see that they're not alone in this, and that there are African Americans who truly believe and who trust and want to be a part of the solution for figuring this whole thing out, especially with gun violence. So we were there. But I think a part of what we have to do is form those alliances so that when a crisis comes, because this won't be the last crisis.
We know that.
Yeah, we've lived it, right? So when those crises come, you pick up the phone, you call me, I call my friends, and I call others, and we all come together and we make decisions about what that voice is going to be, what that message is going to be, and how we're going to present it so that, it's not just, it's not just and sometimes I think the media has a tendency to pick up parts of
very much
and not pick up the whole story,
or not cover it at all.
Exactly.
Sometimes, which is
exactly.
So, we were talking earlier about the Jewish community and how really the one community that welcomed all Cubans, Blacks, gays
I know.
from day one was,
exactly.
The modern Jewish community,
the
Jewish community that was here, kudos, to the Jewish community because they've been there from day one. And I know lots of people, there were lots of Cuban Jews or lots of
I love that.
All over
Cuban
Jews.
I love it.
So there's a lot of everything, there isn't, and I've never understood, whereas it's easier for me to understand people taking it out on color or accent or xenophobia or gay, or I've never understood anti-Semitism. I know it's alive and well and on the increase, but I've never understood it.
Me either.
I'm like,
but I think you understand it if you look at what's happening today in America, when you have these marches about a fear of being replaced. How do you even think about being replaced? Because nobody can be replaced. I mean, when you look at America, we are one huge, absolutely.
What do you mean fear of being replaced?
There's this big thing with on that other channel station, begins with an F. I won't say what I think it should be, but at any rate, begins with an F. And and one of their big commentators is saying that we will not let anybody, whites will not let anybody replace them. There's this big fear of being replaced.
Can you understand that?
Remember, I come from the philosophy that this place is big enough. America is big enough. I believe that America is bright enough. I believe that America has more than we can imagine, and that there is no need or fear for replacement, because this is one big, huge country. I mean, look at the fact that in Florida, you could go, the only three counties where there's, where it's contiguous, where there's building from Miami all the way up to Palm Beach. Once you get past Palm Beach, do you know how much space there is and how much land there is and how much everything there is? If we would just give people the opportunity, because there's so many ideas that haven't even had a chance to be born yet. And
well, let me tell you, I can understand that message, and I see
being
it.
Replaced.
Yes.
Okay.
And this
you
is
think
how
I could replace you?
No, because I don't think that's what they're saying.
Okay.
This is what I hear.
Okay.
When I hear that is what I hear at work sometimes, not where I currently work, disclaimer.
I know.
But in many places where I have been, and I think, believe it or not, a lot of this falls on the corporate world in terms of the way it's decided to handle diversity and inclusion. Because the white guys where I work would come up to me and say, man, you're lucky. And I would say, what are you talking about? They say, not only are you Hispanic, you're gay. Like, you're never going to get fired. And they really, really, truly believed it. Why? Because the people they saw getting the promotions and coming into job levels were people that had minority status and very visible, either Black, female, even better, female, Black, female color, that whole
female, Black, gay, Asian.
Yeah, in a wheelchair. And then no, I shouldn't say that, but yeah, you know what I mean. Some kind of handicap would work even better for their purposes of counting the little boxes. Every little box. And what happens is, at least in my opinion, sometimes these organizations really, for example, when I was hired somewhere, I was a diversity hire. And the person that hired me got a bonus, right? So think about this. This is happening, Jacqui, and this is why I understand part of that discussion. So the person that came in had less experience, less qualification, less knowledge in a managerial role where people that reported to that person knew that they weren't able to really address. So the message, the horrible message that sends, instead of doing something good for all the right reasons, which is giving opportunity to qualified people, of course, that implies you have to do the work of going out there and finding which, by the way, there are tons.
Oh, yes.
Right? We all know that.
I know that. Right.
So it's really just the work of getting to the right communities and people and organizations to find the talent. They don't do that because that's hard work. It's much easier to just fill in the box and get your bonus. And ultimately that creates a fear among the people that are there who are not in those boxes.
You know what that reminds me of? When I went to college. Remember affirmative action?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they said that I was admitted on an affirmative action, basis. And I thought about it because, I had like a 3.0 GPA. So it wasn't like I was barely getting through high school or anything like that. And I remember so many times being judged because my fellow classmates thought that I was affirmative action. Got accepted in the college on affirmative action. And I finally found my voice, but it wasn't until my junior year because I'd heard it, first year, second year, but it was in my third year. They would whisper about affirmative action. And I would say, you know what? Affirmative action may have gotten me in here, but affirmative action is not going to get me out. I'm going to graduate from here cum laude. So if affirmative action got me in, maybe we need to get more affirmative action students in here, because if I can graduate cum laude, what does that tell you about affirmative action? They chose some good people to come here to school. I didn't hear it again, but I know that I didn't hear it again, but I know they were still saying it. And I do understand what you're saying now about the whole thing about replacement, because, but the fear, but I think that the people who are in charge are the ones who are creating all of this. And you know what? 98% of the corporations in America are led by, white men who are also afraid of being,
Right. So the easiest thing to do is to just do the box thing and then you're done.
Yeah,
You know,
but
it's
if you
not
do,
about-
but you not only do the box thing, but then you put it out there that this person, Jacqui got in on affirmative action.
Yeah. Well, the same thing happened to me in college.
You're affirmative action.
Yeah, it
too?
was affirmative
How
action.
could you
Apparently,
be affirmative action?
I was affirmative because I'm Hispanic. So I was affirmative action.
You went to a prep school. What are you talking about?
Didn't matter. I went to a prep school in the ghetto in a converted rug factory. Please don't forget that.
I forgot. Belen,
That was my school.
Belen
Right.
was
Yes.
in that horrible.
We had
place.
possums falling from our tiles, right? So it might be Belen Jesuit, but it was a converted rug factory.
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the Belen today.
Yeah, it's a
which is
different,
totally
that's
different.
a different story. But the funny thing about that, Jacqui, is the same thing, by the way. Actually, when I got to my floor, the thing was, what was your SATs? And I had horrible SATs. I had like a 1050 or 1100. Something. Horrible SATs. So they're like, oh, you're here because you're Cuban. I'm like, no, that's not why I'm here. I won first place in the nation in speech, which
That didn't count.
Right. No, that didn't count. So anyway, I felt the struggle that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Interesting story. When I got there, this is the first time I had ever heard person of color. I went to the person to check in and they had different groupings for orientation where you could go. And she told me, oh, you're in the person of color orientation. And I'm like, excuse me. She's like,
see, Cubans get confused because in Miami, you're white. You leave Palm Beach and you become a person of color.
yeah, but even then, I'm a weird person because I never thought color. When I was a little child, I went to St. Hugh's School in the Grove.
Oh, yes.
And my best friend lived on the west side. So I went all the time to the West Grove. I went to Ernie's Burgers, and then I would sleep over his house. I was the type of child, like, I don't know if you've seen that thing with the two little kids and they think that they look identical.
Right. One is black and one is white.
I think like I was that guy.
Yeah.
I just did not see it, nor did I see the difference in the flooring. Like one was wood floor, my home had terrazzo. I never noticed any of that. The first time it dawned on me was when my friend's brother came in and he said, you can't go play outside today. I was like, why can't I go outside? And he said, you can't go outside. There's problems in the streets. And I'm like, well, what kind of problems in the streets? He goes, you're white. I'm like, oh, white. That had never occurred to me. Another strange thing, his grandma used to ask me to go across the street to her. She was bedridden. Okay. And she would just hug me and cry and cry and cry and cry. And of course, at the time, I didn't understand. She was crying because I was white. None of that. I mean, that's what the real life was me at that 7-year-old. That's what it should be. Where nobody sees any of that. But in schools, like we were saying, I was the person of color orientation. The girl checking me in was darker. And I remember asking her, saying, but are you going to be there? I'll see you in the orientation. And she's like, no, I'm Italian. Because I said, you're darker than I am. She goes, no, I'm Italian. So, and this is even funnier, as I got into the whole being a person of color, because then I was a person of color. Because, at that age, right, you take everything. And I'm like, oh, I'm a badge of honor. I'm a person of color. And then until one time, now this was like 10 years later, I said, well, as a person of color, and somebody in the room stood up and said, you are appropriating my race. And I'm like, oh my God. now I'm like this white passing person. And that's what I mean, that we do this to each other instead of understanding. To me, intentions are so much more important than the words we use. But we need to leave space for those intentions.
Yeah. But it's hard to get to the intentions when you've been slapped over the head for appropriating,
Yes. Yeah, no, then I went to crawl in a hole.
Right. You got that scholarship that I should have got. And that's what happens so much, just in general, you look at this stuff and you think to yourself, if we just talk to each other and knew each other, I think it would be a whole lot different. But, the way the system is set up right now, kids don't even go to school together anymore. Most of the schools have been resegregated, which is really sad because, I think that was how I got to know, what white kids were like.
Right. That's how you get the stories.
Yeah. And they got to know those that, were willing, got to know me, got to know my family, loved to come over to the house because the food was so good. They felt like, who made this? And I would just laugh. I'll never forget. One of my Cuban friends came over to the house, and we had grits and eggs
Mm.
for breakfast, and because they spent the night and everything. And she said, "What's a grit?" Just think if she had, I mean, to be able to know that about each other and
Right.
know those kinds of things, it's a totally different, it's just different worlds, but we're not that different.
No, not at all.
And we can't replace each other.
No, agree.
But I think that the way they've drawn the deck, it really pits us against each other.
Agree.
And I think that there's a way that we have to address that ourselves. There's this wonderful book by Anand, and I cannot pronounce his last name, but it's really good, and it's called The Rich. I'll get it out, but it's like it just shows how the rules are written so that the 99% continue to keep 99% of the wealth and make the rules and everything in this country. So it's like really, really
That
amazing.
alone
Mhm.
is an enormous conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, that alone.
We have to bring the folks to the table.
I mean,
who
I've
can
had people
understand
tell
that.
me, and I'm in the system, right? So I'm
Mhm.
in financial services. I've been
Right,
there 30
right,
years.
right.
And I've had people tell me, well, we need to bring down the patriarchy. We need to change
But don't
the
mess with
system.
mine.
But at the same time, I'm like, and so what are you proposing? Because most of the times when these arguments come up,
Mhm.
it's very, very, very valid, right?
Right.
And this, by the way, if you talk about Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, talk about socialism, communism,
Mhm.
and these different economic systems,
Mhm.
it very much comes into play. There are very valid flaws and problems with the system.
Right.
But then the answer to those flaws and problems in the system is to take it down. And that's what they do.
Yeah.
But every single time what they replace it with is so much worse than
I know,
what was
and
there.
that's the reason that people are so much against whatever they call it, socialism or communism. Not that I'm for any of that, but I think that there's a part of that what has happened in capitalism now needs to be. We just have to do something different. The inequities are way, way, way too great.
Mhm.
I mean, the fact that we have people who work every single day. I want you to think about this. Who work every single day, work 40 hours, 50 hours a week, and who can't pay rent in Miami, can barely take care of family and kids and everything. And those are the things that just still bother me about our current economic system.
That would bother me, and it does bother me. And I
Yeah.
think that there are hopefully legislators and movements starting to try to
Let's
address
hope so.
some of
Yeah.
those things, because I think those are
Yeah.
real problems.
Because remember, capitalism did not start out to have the kind of values that it has right now. And much of this has come about because of Milton Friedman back in the 70s. Yeah. Who taught that, out of the University of Chicago, taught that greed was good, and that capitalism should be doing nothing but making money for its investors. Before that time, capitalism had what I called a heart, which meant that it tried to figure out how to balance the gains so that everybody could benefit, and not just a very, 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 very small few.
Well, kind of like what I was discussing with my friend as well. I
Mhm.
said, that is one view, but there's so many other views in capitalism. And I really feel that what has taken a big hold in today's current economy is also that social responsibility ethic, which is really being played out in most of the corporate
Yeah.
world. Can it be better? Absolutely. Is it flawed, like in the way it approaches diversity and inclusion? Yes, it's flawed. So, again, there are lots of issues, but we have B corporations, which never existed before. Philanthropy goes through nonprofits. Nonprofits are incredibly significant. And when we talk about bringing down a system or patriarchy, it's what do you replace that with? This person suggested some kind of barter system, which I was like,
I don't know
all right,
about
my point is that it's sometimes very easy to look at those flaws. Those are real flaws.
Yeah.
And my fear is always that what we're aiming at as the villain or the thing that needs to change is off mark, because we're not really listening to the full throttle conversation,
right.
around how those issues play.
But I think that we've got to figure it out, and we've got to really start thinking about it quickly, because people are beginning to feel that they are left out of the system and that they can never make it. They can never catch up or even be included in the game. And I think a lot of it, people feel, or many people, especially, African Americans, feel that they're just being left out of the equation as it relates to capital, just not capitalism necessarily, but just in terms of having a piece of the pie, just having a little piece of the pie.
And when it comes to stuff like we were talking about with getting that affirmative action or getting the opportunity, I am so 150,000 in favor of those opportunities. Where sometimes I am very skeptical is when that individual has made choices which have led them to that situation.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, if you chose not to go to high school, if you chose not to get that degree, you wanted to be the influencer and sing, and it didn't work out.
Sounded like a plan.
sounded like a plan, I mean, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Life isn't going to be as easy.
That's why
there's a safety net.
Yeah, but that's why I love the community college, was now the state college, because it gives people a second chance, a third chance, a fourth chance. I just think that the one thing that everybody should have is the opportunity to
get better,
reinvent themselves if they need to. That's why I feel that returning citizens, quote, ex-offenders, should have a second chance,
absolutely,
or a third chance. And I do feel that this country is the place that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
But if we keep taking away those, those opportunities like affirmative action or diversity hire or whatever, then you never give people a chance to even get
there's no mobility,
get into the door, right? You can't even get into the door. And so, the sacrifices that that people sometimes have to make, they're understandable, because even though, I was affirmative action, I had to make sacrifices. And I think that that's just a part of what goes on in the system, anyway. So, so that's that. But I still feel that color plays too much of a factor in all of this.
I think it's
Color
becoming
should
less.
not-
I think it's become less.
Yeah.
Super happy about that. And I can see a day, not my lifetime.
You shouldn't say that, because when I was a kid, I used to think that I'll never see a black president.
It's true.
happened.
You're right.
So
You're right.
I think that
One
it's
for
possible. Yeah, right. I think it's possible. I just think that we have to figure out how we identify what are the markers that help us get there. So like when you're working on a problem, you look and say, okay, this didn't work. Stop doing that. Let's see what works, and let's continue to do those
what's working.
Things. Yeah, let's do those things that work, because I honestly believe that we will get to a point, and we will get to a day where even though there's a big fight right now to keep things status quo, I just think that the reason that the fight is so strong and so deep and so big is because when you can see the end is coming, you just fight like hell, because you know that it may not be this week or this month, but it's coming. I mean, I look at Georgia, Whoever would have thought?
Stacey Abrams.
Who would have ever thought that we'd have two senators from Georgia, of all places, that make sense, and who would have ever thought that a Black woman, has the, I don't know what word I want to use here. I would say some of the things that I say on the street, but has the possibility of becoming the governor of Georgia, so it's interesting watching all of this and just looking at it.
Sometimes I also wonder to myself, I wonder if Martin Luther King were alive today, what he would think.
He'd be 93.
Been 93. What would he think? I mean, because I feel from everything I've read and, I just feel like he was so ahead of his time and knowing to have the patience of working through the system to build it out, to push it.
Yeah.
In a way that was elegant.
It was
statesman.
It was elegant up until it wasn't elegant.
Right.
Because remember, toward the ends of his life, nobody was happy with him.
Yeah.
He was against the Vietnam War.
Yeah,
he was against the fact that, the rich were getting richer and the poor were getting poorer, because he was leading that poor people's march. And he was also against the whole thing of gun violence and, social justice in this country. So when he spoke out against those things, it's like, you're stepping on too many toes.
I love that, all of those things.
Yeah.
It wasn't so much for me what he said, it was the way he said it.
True.
You never saw a gun, you just did not see him hit, I mean, think about our modern day politicians and what they're like.
I know. Gosh.
He had an elegance, just so much power in the class that he, put forward about the righteousness.
But I think I think that was like a different time, and that's what bothers me about it. And I think about John McCain, and when he said to the lady, he says, no. Mm-hmm. He's a good man. He's not a Muslim.
Right.
His family, he has a good family, and he comes from a good place. And she just was so upset about what he said.
Speaking about that, I think there's a host of Republicans just like John McCain in South Florida.
I believe it too.
And we're not giving them a platform, meaning like somehow or another that voice needs to come back and be elevated, because that's the voice of reason.
I don't think Liz Cheney is alone. I just think that.
Oh, no, not at all. Especially in South Florida.
Yeah.
These are way more modern, Bush Republicans.
Yeah. So, in fact, they're from here, right?
Exactly. Well, listen, but that's for another show.
Oh, so
this
I've got 3 more times to come back now?
8. You're up for 8 more times because it's just too much fun.
You know what we're gonna do the other one.
We are
Black Lives Matter. I gotta do that. I'll talk to my folks, and
I'll talk to some of the Cuban organizations too, because I think
we
that's
need to
an
just have
important
this
bridge.
wonderful round table.
Yeah,
and just even though this one is rectangular, it's okay.
We'll make it round,
right? We can round it out.
We can round it out.
And just have that wonderful, at least just an opening. We don't have to get all the way to the end, but an opening. Conversation.
That's how we get better. So thank you.
I love it.
It's always a pleasure.
Hi, Empress.
Always a pleasure.
Of the galaxy.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks
for inviting me.
No,
I appreciate it.
Thanks. And to everyone out there, thanks for joining us for the Forward Miami show. And I look forward to seeing you next week.